Hi there, this is Stories for Sleep, and I'm Thumani's here to spend a quiet evening with you. A space where nothing needs to get done, where you can let the day go gently. Right now, just lie down as comfortably as you can. Let your hands rest beside you or gently over your belly. No need to adjust anything, just be. Take a slow breath in, hold it softly, then exhale easy and quiet. One more time. Inhale deeply. Feel the air cooling your chest and exhale like you're letting the day slip away. Now bring your attention to your forehead. If you're holding tension, let it go. Let your brow soften. Move down to your shoulders. Feel them sinking into the mattress. Relax your arms, hands, and fingertips. Let them feel light, like they're floating in warm water. Notice your chest and belly gently rising and falling, like a quiet boat rocking on still water. And now, know that there's nothing more you have to do. No one needs you to respond. No one is waiting. This moment is just for you and for a story told softly to help you rest. Whenever you're ready, we'll begin. What if the person you're trying to forget is the one who shows up the most when you're quiet, when you're tired, when your guard is down? What if you moved away, started a new job, deleted every message, and yet, 5 years later, they still appear in your dreams? What if their name still hijacks your thoughts when you least expect it? Not because you chose to think of them, but because you can't not think of them. Today I want to tell you a story not just about remembering someone, but about getting trapped inside the echo of someone who's long gone, and what it takes to finally cross that bridge. Before we begin, if you're someone who carries old names in your head, like stones in your pocket, subscribe to this channel. These are stories of healing, not fast, not easy, but real. Now let's begin. Eli always bought the same coffee, black, no sugar. Same table. Same corner of the cafe where he could watch the street. Every morning like clockwork. He'd moved to Boulder, Colorado nearly 2 years ago. A quiet town tucked into the edge of forest and fog. It wasn't home, but it didn't hurt either. That was enough. He told himself the relocation was for simplicity. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that it was mostly to forget Maya. But forgetting wasn't simple. She hadn't texted in 5 years. No email, no calls. And still there, she was in the space between his breaths in the way a certain song made his hand tremble. He saw her in women walking away, in hands adjusting scarves, in laugh lines not yet his. Some mornings he woke up certain he'd heard her voice, but this morning was different. A small brown envelope sat in his mailbox. No name on the front, just his address. Inside a short handwritten note. You probably don't want to hear from me, but I had to try. I never said goodbye properly. Just that. No name. But the handwriting, it was her. Always half tilted, like she was leaning away from the words. He folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope, then into the drawer, then back out again, suddenly, it was as if someone turned the volume up inside his skull. Her laugh, her voice, the sound of her footsteps. The word goodbye wasn't closure, it was gasoline. The anxiety hit that night. Same as before, racing heart, tight chest, the ceiling fan spinning too loud, thoughts spinning even louder. So he walked down 3rd Street, past the darkened bookstore, past the closed diner. There was an old man who sold bread from his porch on weekends. Tonight, the lights were still on. The man didn't ask questions, just looked up and said, "You look like someone who lost a name they still carry." Eli blinked. "What?" The man held out a paper bag. "Take the rye, eat it warm, then go talk to the monk by the forest path, the one who doesn't speak unless you need to hear something." That's vague. "Pain usually is," the man said and closed the door. That night, Eli sat in silence with half a loaf of bread and a mind too loud to eat. The note still lay open on the table, and somewhere inside him, he heard not Maya's voice but his own whisper, something he hadn't let himself say in years. "Why are you still here?" But it wasn't a question for her, it was a question for himself. The first time Eli walked toward the forest trail, he wasn't sure what he was hoping for. Forgiveness, closure, maybe just quiet. But what he found at the end of that path would shake everything he thought he knew about Maya, about memory, and most of all about the person he'd been dragging through all this pain himself. The second time Eli dreamed of Maya that week, she wasn't smiling. She was standing at the edge of the kitchen in their old apartment in Chicago, wearing the same blue sweater she always used to steal from his drawer. Her eyes weren't angry, they were disappointed. He woke up gasping. And this time, the silence wasn't peaceful, it was punishing. 5 years ago, the world fell apart in silence too. It was a Tuesday. He remembered because it was the same day he'd accepted the job in San Francisco. Bigger paycheck, bigger title. He was going to tell Maya that night. He imagined her excited, proud, relieved. Instead, she came through the door holding a voicemail transcript from her little brother's school. Then came the ambulance call. Then the rush to the ER. Then the flat line. Jake, Maya's 14-year-old brother, was gone. An undiagnosed heart condition. No warnings, no symptoms. One moment he was alive. The next, he wasn't. Maya broke like glass. And Eli? He didn't know how to hold her. Not in the days after. Not when she stopped sleeping. Not when she stopped eating. He tried meals, space quiet words. But grief makes language useless. And in the middle of it all, he made the worst mistake of his life. He mentioned the San Francisco job offer, not because he wanted to leave, but because he didn't know what else to say. That was the night she walked out. No screaming, no fight. Just, "You always put yourself first, even now," he tried to explain. He called, wrote, waited outside her sister's apartment. 3 days later, Maya's cousin handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, a photo of Jake and Maya as kids, and a sticky note on the back, "You let him die. You chose ambition over family." It wasn't signed. but he knew her handwriting. He stared at that note until his hands went numb. She had turned her back, and with her went everything he thought was real. Over the next few months, the guilt grew like mold. Eli stopped attending family dinners, declined promotions, skipped holidays. He sold the apartment, quit the job, packed only what fit in the truck, and drove west until the voices in his head were softer than the voices in his past. But no matter how far he ran, her words clung to him like wet clothes. You always put yourself first. You let him die. Sometimes he would say them out loud just to dull their sting. That morning in Boulder, after the dream, Eli sat on the kitchen floor and stared at the envelope Maya had just sent. It wasn't rage he felt. It was something slower, thicker, like grief wrapped in shame, coated in something no word could describe. He stood up too quickly and knocked over the table. The envelope fluttered to the ground like a feather and landed perfectly next to a framed photo of them taken on a mountain trail in Colorado Springs. Without thinking, he picked up the frame and hurled it into the wall. Glass shattered across the floor. The silence afterward was louder than the crash. Eli sank to the ground, his chest heaving, not because of the photo, but because deep down he knew. He wasn't just angry at Maya, he was angry at himself for never saying what needed to be said, for freezing, for hoping time would do the work his heart wouldn't. That night, he returned to the bakery. The old man wasn't on the porch this time, but taped to the door was a small paper with fading ink. If you've come twice, the monk is waiting. West Trail, dawn. Eli didn't sleep, just lay there staring at the ceiling. Maya's voice returned, not in anger this time, but as a question. Did you ever really see me? Or just who you needed me to be? When dawn broke, Eli dressed in layers. The Colorado wind was sharp. He followed the west trail past the tree line. Mist curled around pine trunks like smoke. Birds didn't sing. The forest felt still, watching. Half a mile in, he found a gate made of stone and wood older than the trail itself. A small brass sign, Tuvien Tamtrong Empty Heart Monastery. There were no guards, no path beyond the gate, just moss stone and silence. But somewhere in that silence, Eli felt something shift, as if the pain he carried wasn't just his, as if this place had seen it all before. He didn't know it yet, but this forest would become the map of his mind. And the man he would meet behind those walls wouldn't give him answers. He would give him tools. But first, Eli would have to learn something far more difficult than forgetting Maya. He'd have to face her inside himself. The gate creaked open without a sound. No one greeted him. No signs pointed the way. The monastery, if it could be called that, was a collection of stone structures half consumed by ivy and fog. The roofs bowed like old men in meditation. The moss on the steps seemed older than the path itself. Eli paused at the threshold, Half of him expected incense, chants, something cinematic. Instead, the only sound was the rustling of leaves and a distant wooden bell echoing like a breath through time. He wandered deeper until he found a clearing where a small man in a brown robe sat beside a wooden tub washing what looked like potatoes. Eli cleared his throat. The man didn't look up. Instead, he pointed at a nearby bench and muttered, "Sit." It wasn't a command, more like an observation. So Eli sat. The monk, clearly Old Thien, though he hadn't introduced himself, kept washing his hands, steady, slow, deliberate. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. Then finally, without looking up, the monk asked, "Still carrying her?" The words hit harder than expected. Eli opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Old Thien stood, wiped his hands, and walked into a small shed. When he returned, he held something unexpected, a large wooden basket, worn, riddled with holes along the sides and bottom. He placed it at Eli's feet. "Fill it with water from the stream. Bring it back." Eli blinked. "It's full of holes." Old Thien nodded, as if this were the most unremarkable fact in the world. "Exactly." Then he turned and disappeared into the trees. Eli almost laughed. Was this a test? A joke? But there was something in the monk's eyes, not cruelty, not mockery, just calm expectation, like he was being watched by the forest itself. So Eli carried the basket down the slope to where the stream whispered its way between the rocks. He dipped the basket. Water gushed out, instantly falling in trails through the holes. By the time he returned, it was empty. Old Thien sat in the same spot peeling carrots now. "Try again," he said without looking up. Eli went again, then again, and again. By the 5th time, his arms ached and his shoes were soaked. He slammed the empty basket on the ground. "It's pointless," he growled. "The water won't stay." Old Thien looked up and shrugged. Neither do thoughts. That night, Eli didn't speak. He was offered a place to sleep in the guest room. A thin mat, a wool blanket, no pillow. But he didn't mind. His mind was louder than any discomfort. What was the point of the basket? Why did that single sentence still carrying her slice through him like a blade? He didn't have answers, only noise. Over the next few days, the monk said little. But the tasks continued. Fill the basket. Sweep the leaves that would fall again. Clean the same window every morning, even though no one ever looked through it. Each action felt like mockery. Until the 4th morning, when Eli paused by the stream and for the first time noticed something new. The reflection, his own, but not the man he expected to see. This man looked younger somehow. Not in the face, but in the way he stood. Less clenched, less armored. He stared at his reflection for a long time, then whispered, "Who are you really?" And the water rippled, as if to say, "You're starting to ask the right questions." That evening, during a rare moment of conversation, Eli asked, What exactly am I doing here? Old Thien placed a bowl of rice in front of him and said simply, "Leaking." Eli frowned. "You mean the basket?" The monk shook his head. "You." For the first time, Eli didn't get angry. Instead, he listened. And Thien went on, "You came here thinking she still lives in your mind. But what lives there is the version of you that froze, the one who needed to be right, needed to be forgiven, needed closure. That version is the basket. It doesn't hold peace because it leaks judgment, resentment, blame, self-hate." Eli stared at the floor. "So what now? Just let go." The monk chuckled softly. Letting go isn't an action. It's the moment when clinging becomes too heavy. Then silence. That night, Eli dreamed not of Maya, but of himself. Standing on a hill, shouting into an empty canyon. But no sound came back. And somehow, for the first time, that silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space. The next morning, Eli filled the basket without protest. He watched the water fall through the holes like before. But this time he noticed something else. The inside of the basket was clean. Days of pouring water had worn away the dirt, the stains, the moss. Maybe it never held water, but maybe it was never supposed to. Eli had started to think he was getting somewhere. He woke up before the bell, carried the basket without complaint, drank tea in silence, even caught himself smiling once when a squirrel stole rice from the monk's bowl and Old Thien didn't flinch. There was rhythm now, and in that rhythm, a strange calm. The thoughts of Maya still came, but softer, like a song from another room. No longer screaming, no longer tearing at the walls of his memory. Just there. And yet, on the 7th morning, something cracked. It started with a letter, not from Maya, from her mother. It had found him through his old mailing address, forwarded to the monastery through a P.O. box he forgot he still had. A single sheet of paper, typed. "We heard you were living in some forest. You always did find a way to run. I suppose this is your idea of redemption. Washing carrots and staring at trees. Maya is doing fine. She doesn't need closure from you. She needed you to show up when it mattered. You didn't. Stop trying to write your own ending." Eli read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and tucked it under his mat. But the words kept bleeding through the silence. That afternoon, he exploded. The moment came without warning. He was sweeping leaves in the courtyard when Old Thien asked as calmly as ever, "What are you clinging to today?" Eli snapped. "What do you want from me?" Thien blinked. "Nothing." "Exactly," Eli barked. "You just sit there staring, making me carry water in a leaky basket and talk in riddles while my life disintegrates. You say I'm leaking, that I'm clinging, that I'm not ready to let go. But what about her? What about the people people who hurt you and don't show up with baskets. The monk was silent. Eli kept going. You talk about peace like it's just waiting in the forest. But some of us lost more than silence. Some of us were blamed, lied about. Some of us begged for a chance to fix things and were met with locked doors. His voice broke. And now I'm here, pouring water through a joke of a basket while they write letters, calling me a coward. The courtyard went still. Leaves paused mid-fall. Even the wind seemed to listen. Old Thien set his broom down, then said softly, "You want healing to be justice. But healing isn't fair. It's free." Eli turned to walk away, but stopped. There in the corner of the monastery wall hung a small wooden plaque, something he'd passed a dozen times but never noticed. 4 carved words. "The stone is yours." He stared. Something about the phrase made his stomach knot. Later that night by the fire, he asked the monk, "What does it mean?" Thien poured tea. When someone throws a stone at your heart, you can dodge, you can throw back, or most often, you pick it up, carry it, polish it, name it, keep it close. Eventually, he continued, you start telling people it's your stone, and it weighs so much you forget you ever lived without it. Eli didn't respond, but his hand reached into the mat beneath him and found the letter. He didn't burn it. Not yet. But he didn't read it again either. The next morning, Eli returned to the stream. Same path, same cold air. But this time, he didn't bring the basket. Instead, he sat by the water and listened to birds, to the gentle rush of current, to the echo of his own breath. And then, unexpectedly, he spoke aloud. "Maya, if you're still in there, I'm sorry you lost him. I'm sorry I didn't know how to stay. And I'm sorry I've carried this stone for so long. I think it's time I put it down." He placed the letter between 2 rocks beside the stream. Not as an offering, not as a burial, but as a release. That evening, Old Thien handed him a bowl of soup. No words. But this time, Eli didn't feel the need for any. There was no grand enlightenment, no sudden warmth of liberation, just a quiet, like the absence of a storm. It happened on the 11th day, not during meditation, not while carrying the basket, but over a bowl of leftover lentil soup. Eli was in the kitchen washing dishes when he knocked over a small box of dried herbs. Chamomile scattered everywhere. As he swept them up, a scent hit him, soft, citrusy, familiar. It stopped him cold. It was Maya's favorite tea. She used to make it when she couldn't sleep. She would sit cross-legged on the window ledge, sipping it with both hands wrapped around the cup like it was keeping her together. And just like that, the memory came flooding back. Not just the smell, the night before Jake died. They'd all been watching a movie. Maya, Jake, Eli. Jake had seemed tired, but he was always tired after soccer. He'd fallen asleep on the couch, snoring softly. Maya draped a blanket over him, and Eli, half joking, said, "That kid's gonna sleep through a tornado." Maya had turned, smiled, and whispered, "He always sleeps like that. But lately, I don't know. He seems off." Eli barely registered it. He said something dismissive, something like, "He's just growing," or "Kids are weird." Then he went back to the movie. Maya had lingered for a moment longer, staring at her brother. Then, let it go. Now in the monastery kitchen, Eli dropped the broom. The realization struck like thunder. She had seen it. She'd sensed it. She hadn't said much, but she had felt something was wrong. And he'd brushed it off. Not because he didn't care, but because he'd been tired, distracted, focused on work, focused on himself. It wasn't that he killed Jake, but in that moment he chose ease over attention. Later that evening, Eli sat by the fire with Old Thien. The monk was placing dried citrus peel into a pot of boiling water. Eli didn't speak for a while. Then softly, I remembered something. Thien looked up. Maya noticed something was off. The night before it happened. And I told her not to worry. I didn't listen. I didn't mean harm. But I missed it. The monk stirred the tea slowly. You want to carry the weight for something that was never yours to hold alone? Eli shook his head. I'm not sure that helps. Thien didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached behind him and pulled out a smooth stone one that had been resting near the fire. This stone is warm, he said, placing it in Eli's hand. But not because it chose to be. It just sat by the fire long enough. Some pains don't need fixing. They just need holding. That night, Eli didn't dream of Maya. He dreamed of Jake. The boy wasn't angry, wasn't afraid. He was sitting on a swing, feet not touching the ground. When he saw Eli, he smiled. You were a good brother-in-law, he said matter-of-factly. Eli sat beside him. Was I? Jake shrugged. Good enough. You made her laugh. You showed up. Mostly. They sat in silence. Then Jake said, But you keep forgetting. It wasn't your job to save me. The swing creaked. It was hers. And then he was gone. Eli woke up with tears on his face and a calm in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He walked out into the garden and found Old Thien pruning bonsai. Eli bowed, not from tradition, but from something deeper. Thank you. The monk raised an eyebrow. For what? Eli smiled. For reminding me I'm not the sum of what I couldn't do. Later that afternoon, Eli found a quiet spot near the stream. He brought a journal, opened it, and for the first time in 5 years, he wrote a letter to Maya. Not for closure, not for response, just for truth. I didn't listen when you needed me to. I thought silence was support. I thought holding space meant not questioning you. But I see now, you weren't asking for quiet. You were asking for someone to help carry the fear you couldn't name. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. I'm not angry anymore. And I'm done punishing myself in your name. What happened to Jake wasn't our fault, but how we carried the grief that was ours. Wherever you are, I hope hope you're lighter now." "I am." He folded the letter, placed it beneath a rock by the stream, and walked away. This time he didn't look back. Eli didn't expect a reply, but one came anyway. A week after placing the letter beneath the river rock, he returned to the mailbox at the front gate of the monastery, a rusted tin box rarely checked, mostly filled with wind and silence. Inside a white envelope, no return address, just his name. The handwriting wasn't Maya's, but the paper inside was hers. It was the letter he had written 5 years ago. The last one. He'd sent it after everything fell apart. The night before he left Chicago for good. A letter filled with sorrow, guilt, and unfinished words. Back then, she never responded. He had assumed she never opened it. But now, here it was. Returned. Still sealed. Untouched. Eli stood under the cedar tree for a long time, holding it in his hands. It was strange how something could feel both heavy and completely weightless. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The man who wrote that letter wasn't standing here anymore. That evening, he found Old Thien preparing the tea fire. The monk didn't look up when Eli approached. "I got something back today," Eli said, holding the envelope. Thien stirred the coals. Sometimes the world returns what we forgot to leave behind. Eli sat beside him. "I used to think healing meant things going back to how they were." The monk handed him a cup of tea. "That's not healing. That's nostalgia in disguise." Eli sipped slowly. Let the warmth linger in his chest. "Do you ever think we invent people? The version of them we needed them to be?" Thien chuckled softly. "Of course. And when they don't match the version we built, we punish them. Or ourselves." Eli nodded. "I think I've forgiven the version of her I invented." In the days that followed, something subtle shifted. He no longer woke in dread, no longer paused at the sound of her name, no longer flinched when memories returned. They still came, but without teeth. He found himself humming again while sweeping the courtyard. He planted a tiny herb garden outside the guest house, even shared a silent laugh with one of the younger monks when a raccoon boldly stole a pear from the kitchen window. And one morning, Old Thien approached him with something unexpected, a folded piece of cloth. Inside it, a simple, weathered robe. Brown, just like the others. "You don't have to wear it," Thien said, "but you've earned it." Eli stared at it. "I'm not a monk," the elder shrugged. "Then wear it as a reminder of who you no longer are." Eli didn't leave the monastery right away, but he didn't stay hidden either. He began guiding the occasional retreat guest through walking meditation, shared meals, shared silences, and sometimes shared stories. Not about Maya, not about Jake, but about carrying stones, about leaking baskets, about the quiet revolution of showing up for your own healing again and again and again. People listened, not because he was wise, but because he was honest. On the day the season changed from late summer into fall, Eli took one final walk down the stream path. paper had gone. Perhaps the wind had taken it, or the water, or some forest creature had made it into a nest. He smiled. That was how letting go worked, wasn't it? One day you placed it down, and one day you realized it never came back. And somehow, neither did the ache. That night, as the wind began to carry the first hints of winter, Eli lit a candle in his room. He placed the old unopened letter in a small ceramic bowl and watched it burn slow, clean, quiet. Not with rage, not with grief, but with something softer, something like gratitude. The next morning he walked into the meditation hall just as dawn broke across the sky. He bowed, not out of duty, but out of reverence, for the version of himself who had arrived here, wounded, angry, full of ghosts. For the version who now sat in his place, still imperfect, still learning, but free. The first snow came quietly. No thunder, no warning, just a soft white veil brushing over the monastery roofs like a hand, smoothing a wrinkled page. Eli stood at the edge of the courtyard, wrapped in the brown robe he had once refused to wear. It didn't feel like a uniform now. It felt like skin. It had been 6 months since the letter burned. 2 since he stopped checking the mailbox. And 1 since he began guiding guests on their first silent retreat. People came from all kinds of lives. Lawyers, nurses, artists, retirees. Some arrived angry. Some arrived numb. Most arrived tired in ways they didn't yet have words for. Eli never told them what to think. He simply walked beside them, sometimes in silence, sometimes with questions like, "What are you still carrying?" Or "What would it look like to put it down?" They often cried, not because of what he said, but because of how he listened. One evening, a woman named Kara stayed behind after group meditation. She had sat rigidly the entire session as if holding her breath. When the others left, she approached him, eyes brimming. "Do you ever stop thinking about the people who hurt you?" Eli smiled gently. "I used to think that was the goal." She looked at him unsure. "And now?" He paused. "Now I think peace isn't getting rid of them. It's learning to sit beside their memory without flinching." She didn't speak again, but the next morning, she brought him tea. That was enough. One afternoon, as the snow thickened and silence blanketed the forest, Eli returned to the stream. Not with a letter, not with a basket, just himself. He knelt beside the water, now frozen at the edges, and dipped his fingers in. It was colder than he remembered, sharper, more honest. And in the reflection, he saw a man he finally recognized. Not perfect, not healed in some cinematic way, but awake. He whispered to the water, "You can stay, Maya. I don't need to evict you anymore. You are part of the story, but not the whole story. And certainly not the ending." The current rippled beneath the ice, and for a brief moment, he swore he saw her smile just behind the clouds of his memory. Not the Maya who blamed, not the Maya who left, but the Maya who once once held tea in both hands and whispered fears she didn't know how to name. He smiled back. That night, by candlelight, Eli began writing again. Not letters, not journals, but small parables, stories about baskets with holes and rivers with memory, and how sometimes forgiveness isn't an act, but a place you learn to live in. He didn't plan to publish, but he kept writing, and the stories kept coming. One morning, Old Thien joined him on the steps. They sat in silence watching icicles melt into the soil. Finally, the monk spoke. "Do you know the difference between a wound and a scar?" Eli looked at him, shook his head. Thien traced a finger along the rim of his teacup. A wound demands attention. A scar tells a story. You are no longer bleeding, Eli, but your story is still here. Tell it kindly. Eli nodded. That night, as the wind howled through the trees and the fire crackled in its stone cradle, Eli lit a single candle beside his bed. He stared into the flame, then closed his eyes, and in that moment he felt it fully. Not closure, not triumph, but the quiet, humbling arrival of peace. The kind you don't earn, the kind you stop resisting. We all carry someone longer than we should. A voice, a memory, a version of ourselves we didn't know how to leave behind. But healing doesn't always ask us to forget. Sometimes it just asks us to soften the way we remember. Because when we stop trying to erase the pain, we begin to understand what it was trying to teach us. Letting go doesn't mean pushing them out of your mind. It means making enough space for your own breath to come through. And when it does, when peace finally flows in, when noise once lived, that's when the story begins again. Not with a scream, but with a whisper. A whisper that says, "You're still here. You're still whole. You're free." Thank you for walking this story with us. May your path be gentle and may your heart return to itself. Some people enter our lives like the wind, soft, almost silent, but they leave behind a trace that lingers long after they've gone. We're told that healing means forgetting, that to move on we must erase every trace of the person who once stirred or hurt our heart. But the truth is often quieter. Sometimes healing begins when we stop trying to push them away and instead learn to see them with understanding, with compassion, and without fear. Eli's story is not a tale of revenge or triumph. It is a soft, meditative song about release. He couldn't change the past, but he changed how he spoke to it. And in doing so, he discovered this: the one who wounded us doesn't need to disappear from our mind for us to be at peace. They just need to be held no longer by anger, expectations, or the ache for a different ending. If you've ever lost sleep over a name that won't leave your head, ask yourself, am I trying to forget or learning to accept? Because peace may not live on the other side of forgetting, but right here in the moment, you stop fighting yourself. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need it too. And if you'd like more healing stories like this one, subscribe so you won't miss what's next. wishing you a quiet night, a light mind and a heart spacious enough to forgive both others and yourself.